r/nuclear revenge, a revenge Satan would hesitate to do. I will have to reveal and admit a few things about myself I'd rather not, and I'm not proud of. If you hate or struggle with reading, then don't even continue. My story is unfortunately true, and I would not wish my life upon anyone, not even those I chose to seek out revenge upon. When I was 18, my father suffered a debilitating stroke and could never work or drive again. I volunteered to look after him as my mother had a full-time job, and my family needed her to keep working. Sadly, exactly 1 year to the day of his stroke, he passed away after enduring a triple bypass. I lost my shit, as we used to say back in the day, and it changed something inside of me. I had lived a somewhat sheltered life due to regularly attending church and church activities. When my father passed, if I wanted to go to college, I would have to pay for it out of pocket. I did not qualify for any loans. Thankfully, in retrospect, I got a menial job and began partying at age 19. Having never tasted alcohol, done drugs, had sex, etc. I had been bullied quite a bit growing up. I developed very late and always looked several years younger than my friends. At a party one night, I met a guy several years older than me. We'll call Benji. He asked me to come by after my shift at my shitty minimum wage job the next day, and I agreed. When I arrived, he brought me into his house where two of his friends were busy sorting through a table of white powder. I'd seen drugs in movies, so I rightfully assumed it was cocaine. They offered a line and laughed at my refusal to try it. The reason Benji had singled me out was the fact that even at age 19, I looked like I should have been a freshman or sophomore in high school. The dealer and his guys had kids selling cocaine at all of the local high schools. The area I am from had a lot of old wealth and trust fund kids. They wanted me to go to each high school campus each day and pick up cash, while dropping off pre-weighed bags of coke. They would buy packs of cigarettes and put coke in each, with a small initial on the bottom indicating which school. They'd gotten their hands on a cellophane wrapping machine that would seal and shrink the plastic. Everything worked well as planned for years. It was amazing to learn how many cops, lawyers and even judges were on the take. I did things in those younger days that could have gotten me very long prison sentences or worse had I been caught. I quit my stupid job and worked daily for Benji. If I wasn't delivering or weighing cocaine, Benji and his buddies were teaching me how to shoot guns, work out or fight. They'd built a full-size boxing ring out back because they truly loved to spar. They sensed I'd been picked on a lot growing up. Even though I'd grown another 3 inches in height after high school to stand 6'2" inches, I was still wiry and not very strong. Benji was several years older than me and had been stationed in South Korea for many years. There he took it upon himself to learn a form of martial arts known as subak, but he'd also been a boxer as well. The 3 guys loved teaching me how to handle myself. They'd teach me to master one move, then delighted in springing a new never before seen move on me. None of this was ever meant to attack anyone, strictly self-defense. They wanted to be sure I could protect myself should anything bad go down and wanted me to be able to have their backs. Benji made me carry a loaded 9mm everywhere we drove. He carried a huge .357 Magnum revolver. Eventually I was several years into college and had begun to sell to classmates. My mom was proud I was paying for my own tuition and books, never asking how. Yes, there are some people, albeit very few, that use money earned from unsavory deeds to better themselves. Just as there are a few strippers who use that money to get a degree. It is rare, but it does happen. What my mom never knew was the fact I was making more in a week selling drugs than she did as a teacher in a month. I drove an old Camry. I never bought flashy clothes or threw money around to impress anyone. I kept as low a profile as I could. I finished my BA degree in 3 years due to having plenty of free time. I initially wanted to be a lawyer, but I had known far too many corrupt cops and judges. I did study law with no goal of ever passing the bar, because I wanted to become and eventually became a jury consultant. For those that don't know what that is, when a law firm has a client they are defending, a list of potential jurors is sent out. Television makes it look like lawyers decide for or against a potential juror on the spot in court. A good lawyer already has a very good idea of each potential juror's background before they enter the room. My job was to take each name and research any background I could find. The firm I worked for decided what was pertinent information for each particular case. The firm I work for has the highest regard in my area. I can research a lot of information about people legally through something as simple as an online background data site. In the much more recent past, I reacquainted with a high school classmate we'll call Shayna. I discovered she and I had both had crushes on each other back in the day, but we'd both been too shy to say a word to each other. Without a lot of pointless details, suffice it to say Shayna and I became best friends, fell head over heels in love and were planning a future together. Both of our previous relationships had been disasters. Mine in particular had left me feeling totally dead inside, believing I was incapable of love. It had been years since I had dated by choice. My previous ex, we'll call Allison, had done things cold and utterly heartless to cause our breakup. I was nothing but good to her, rescuing her from an abusive relationship, never abused her and let her know no human deserves to be abused. When she stabbed me in the back and left me, my life was in total ruin. Finding Shayna didn't just give me hope. It made me realize that every relationship before her had been pointless. Shayna was the love of my lifetime. We were meant to be together, and finally were. Sadly, 5 years ago I woke to discover Shayna was not beside me. I thought nothing of it until I went into the laundry room to find her face down in the floor. When I picked her up, even before I turned her over, I knew something was wrong. Her body was completely stiff. When I did turn her over, I realized she was dead. Rigor mortis had already set in, and her face was frozen in the most painful expression of agony you could imagine. I called 911 even knowing she was already dead and long past saving. I really don't want to go into detail about that night. Suffice it to say the cops suspected I'd done something or shed OD'd. For 5 hours detectives went through everything we owned. I was questioned repeatedly, the same questions by multiple cops. All the while I was trying to console her mother with the realization her one and only daughter was dead. The next day I accompanied Shayna's mother to Shayna's neurologist. Shayna had epilepsy and her doctor suspected she might have died from SUDEP, sudden unexpected death due to epilepsy, which neither of us had ever heard of. Months later when the autopsy came back, that was the cause of death. The next few days were a blur of misery, tears and disbelief. Devastated does not begin to express how I felt from that point for many months. I will not lie, there were many moments I thought of and even planned to take my own life. I knew Shayna would want me to live, and after seeing how the loss of a child had affected her mother, I could not do that to my own mom. I managed to face the future only by focusing on my mother, who was getting up in years at the time. I closed myself off to all friends and extended family. It was hard enough just having the fortitude to hold down my job and look after my mom. I worked out every day and did cycling for cardio. I took some Krav Maga classes to relieve stress, but I didn't even think of dating, and frankly the idea seemed pointless. Shayna was a truly special person with a beautiful soul. I knew I could never have that kind of relationship with anyone ever again. Eventually 2 years passed, and I met a female we will call Angie. We initially started hanging out as friends, again as that is what I needed most at the time. But as I opened up about what had happened with Allison and then Shayna, we got closer and Angie seemed to sympathize. We started sleeping together and eventually became a couple. I was still having to keep some focus on my mother, though I enjoyed my time with Angie. She seemed to appreciate that I actually listened, spoke honestly and was protective of her. She said she loved me, and I admitted I loved her. I never told her a word about how I'd paid for college or the things I'd seen or done. Shayna knew and loved me in spite of it all. While I knew it would never be what Shayna and I had, I never told or even hinted at that to Angie. Things went along well for the most part. My mother's need for assistance was fairly limited. Angie knew what I'd endured losing Shayna, and she seemed to understand the responsibility I had looking after my mom. Angie and I had been in a committed monogamous relationship for well over a year when my mother had to have some medical tests done. My mom had a leaking heart valve and the tests were to determine if they could repair the valve. A week later we received good news. The valve could indeed be replaced. However, we also received devastating news. While running the tests they discovered 4 small masses in and around her right kidney. The odds were high that the masses were tumors and malignant. The doctors did a biopsy to discover she did in fact have renal, kidney, cancer. She began chemotherapy and I knew my focus needed to be on my mom. Things had been going great with Angie. We were planning to move in together. She lived in a town about 30 miles from mine. When I told Angie about my mom, she seemed deeply concerned and supportive. When I explained it meant we would see less of each other, she assured me that she had no desire to put things between us on hold. She said she wanted to be there for me if in no other way than as emotional support. I told Angie, in fact I urged Angie, that if she decided she wanted to take a break or thought she might be interested in anyone she met, to just tell me, and I would understand. She assured me that she cherished me in her life, and that nobody could ever take my place. Initially the chemotherapy seemed to be having none of the horrible side effects. It was well into her second month before she started noticing weakness and a loss of appetite. I texted Angie multiple times per day every day. She would message me asking how my mom was doing as soon as she woke up each morning, and we often spent hours before falling asleep talking and telling each other how much they were missed. We got to see and spend the night together about every 2 weeks, but everything seemed fine when we did. My mom's condition began to worsen, so I told Angie that she should go out with friends and have some enjoyment in life. As summer began, I knew Angie would enjoy going to outdoor activities even without me. My mom's failing health that summer meant no fun in the sun for me. Angie would go out with friends and I enjoyed hearing about silly things she and her friends did. I was genuinely glad she wasn't being a shut-in over issues in my life. She always expressed concern and sadness each time I told her what was going on with my mom. The chemo was in fact killing the cancer cells. However, she was growing more and more frail. I realized cancer was no longer killing my mother. The medicine was. I needed to take a break. So a group of ladies from my mom's church came to sit with her to give me a little free time on my own. I called Angie as I was nearing her town. She gave me the address of where she and her friends were to meet them. When I arrived, I saw most of her friends which I'd already met. As I made my way through the house to the back deck, I saw the guy sitting very close to Angie. They were both laughing and cutting up with other friends. She introduced me as her boyfriend to the guy we will call Will. He shook my hand insisting he was glad to meet me. I was cordial to him. I don't think Angie suspected I immediately felt something was amiss with Will. Suppose many people get a gut feeling when they encounter someone shifty. Due to my own criminal activity many years before, my takes 1 to know 1 instincts told me there was something shady about Will. I knew he was new to their group of friends. None of them, including Angie, had known him longer than a couple of months. I must be clear that I know now what I felt at the time was not jealousy. Angie had many male friends, all of whom I genuinely liked. But there was something I sensed about Will that made me a bit skeptical about his character. I tried my best to ignore it, writing the feeling off as mere jealousy. I began to talk with Angie and her friends, trying to put my mind at ease. I monitored Will from afar and interacted with him cordially. Angie and I stayed at her place that night before I had to leave to head home. Over the next several weeks my mother's condition began to worsen, but Angie and I spoke and texted throughout the day every day. In hindsight I now realize I was initiating most of our communication, but at the time I wasn't keeping count. One day a few relatives volunteered to look after my mom to give me a break. I headed to see Angie, calling her on the way. She told me what restaurant she and friends were having dinner, so I made my way there. I was pulling into a parking space and saw Will get into a late model black Mustang. He pulled out, though he did not see me, and familiar with my car. I made my way inside where Angie and her friends greeted me with hugs and words of sympathy and encouragement. We all had dinner and a few drinks before Angie and I went back to her place. Before bed, I casually asked why Will had left before I got to say hello. Angie stated she had no idea Will had even been at the restaurant. The place we'd eaten was in a strip mall next to several other businesses. I thought perhaps he had come out of one of those stores and neither Angie nor her friends had seen him. At any rate, I again stayed with her that night before heading back to my place about noon. The next day my mom became very ill and had to be taken to the hospital via ambulance. She had pneumonia and was extremely weak due to the chemo and susceptible to many ailments. For 3 weeks she was hospitalized. They gave her many medications via an IV, but her condition worsened each day. The doctors finally informed me she had at most a week to live. I knew she would not want to leave this earth in that hospital room. So, the staff made arrangements for hospice to bring her home and help me make her last few days as peaceful as possible. When everything had been set up, we brought my mom home. Though extremely weak, she was glad to see her house and familiar settings once again. We both knew she didn't have much longer to live. While she was a bit afraid, she also told me she was ready to go and see my father once again after so long. I got one of my cousins to look after my mom for a few hours, got in my car and drove to see Angie without calling. I hadn't called because I was crying so hard facing my mom's impending demise. I wouldn't have been able to talk. When I arrived at Angie's house, I saw a black Mustang parked in her driveway behind her car. I actually didn't think anything of it, as I was so focused on soon losing my mother. I used the key she had given me to enter into the kitchen as we always did. As soon as the door opened, I heard loud music playing but still didn't really suspect anything. I saw no one in the living room or on the back deck. I walked down the hallway toward her bedroom and heard noises coming from inside. As I reached for the door handle, I stopped. I realized the sounds I heard were sexual in nature. My heart sank even further as I pulled back my hand, not wanting to draw attention. Her bathroom was connected to a guest room with an adjoining bathroom. I quietly walked around and into the unlit bathroom to find her bedroom door open. I stopped in my tracks as I saw them both completely naked going at it, oblivious to my presence. Honestly, my first instinct was run full speed and introduce his face to the back of his skull with my knee. But I knew I had to stay out of trouble for the sake of my mother and my job. So, I slowly backed away shaking with anger. I went back through the guest room, out of the house and to my car. Tune in tomorrow for part 2 where we find out how he gets his revenge on his cheating girlfriend, and the guy sleeping with her.